Last Friday evening, my husband Garrett publicly humiliated me at Le Bernardin restaurant in front of his colleagues, calling me Barren and announcing that our marriage had been a complete waste of his prime reproductive years. What he didn't know was that Dr. Camille Rousseau from the Westbridge Fertility Institute had been sitting 3 tables away, and she was about to reveal information that would make his mistress Natasha turn ghost white and excuse herself to the bathroom for 20 minutes. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the people who claim to love us most sometimes work the hardest to destroy our sense of self-worth. Before we dive back in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story hit home, hit that subscribe button. I've got something really special lined up for tomorrow. My name is Dr. Evelyn Ashford, though for the past 6 years, I've been known simply as Mrs. Garrett Thornfield, devoted wife to a successful investment banker at Hartwell Associates in downtown Millbrook. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me as I walked through the marble lobbies of medical conferences each month, my badge identifying me as a spouse attendee rather than the reproductive endocrinologist I had trained to become at Johns Hopkins University 15 years earlier. The transformation from Dr. Evelyn Ashford to Mrs. Garrett Thornfield had been so gradual that I barely noticed when my professional identity disappeared entirely. It began with what seemed like reasonable compromises when we moved to Millbrook for Garrett's promotion to senior portfolio manager. The fertility clinics in the area had limited openings, and the few positions available were designed for recent residents rather than experienced physicians with specialized training in reproductive medicine. Initially, I planned to take a temporary break from clinical practice while we established ourselves in our new community. Garrett's position offered substantial financial rewards and advancement opportunities, while the affluent suburb of Millbrook provided the kind of lifestyle we had always envisioned. The plan was for me to resume my medical career once we were settled, perhaps by opening a private practice or joining one of the established fertility centers in the greater metropolitan area. However, temporary breaks have a way of becoming permanent arrangements when societal pressures consistently reinforce traditional gender roles. Garrett's colleagues and their wives formed an exclusive social circle where success was measured by the husband's professional achievements and the wife's ability to maintain an elegant household while supporting her husband's career advancement. Corporate dinner parties featured conversations where men discussed market strategies and client acquisitions, while women shared stories about interior decorating projects in charity fundraising events. The unspoken expectation was that wives should focus their considerable education and intelligence on enhancing their husbands' professional reputations rather than pursuing independent medical careers that might conflict with social obligations and family planning priorities. My daily routine evolved into a pattern that felt both luxurious and suffocating. Morning activities included reviewing Garrett's schedule to ensure his business attire was impeccably maintained and his client entertainment plans were flawlessly coordinated. Our home in the prestigious Brookhaven Hills neighborhood required constant attention, from managing the household staff to overseeing the elaborate dinner parties that were essential for Garrett's networking strategy with high-net-worth clients. Community involvement became my primary source of intellectual stimulation and professional identity. The Millbrook Women's Auxiliary provided opportunities to organize healthcare awareness campaigns, while volunteer work at the Regional Medical Center allowed me to maintain some connection to the medical field I had abandoned. These activities were meaningful in their own right, but they also served as painful reminders of the clinical career I had sacrificed. The hospital volunteer work proved particularly bittersweet. Patients and staff frequently assumed that my medical knowledge came from being married to a physician rather than from my own extensive training in reproductive endocrinology. When I corrected these assumptions, the typical response was surprise, followed by questions about why I wasn't practicing medicine myself. These conversations forced me to articulate explanations that I had never fully examined. The responses I offered revealed the extent to which I had internalized justifications for abandoning my medical career. I explained that fertility medicine was emotionally demanding and required unpredictable schedules that would interfere with family planning priorities. I mentioned that establishing a new practice required substantial time investment that would conflict with supporting Garrett's career advancement. I suggested that volunteer work allowed me to contribute to healthcare without the stress and liability concerns associated with clinical practice. Each explanation contained elements of truth, but collectively they represented a comprehensive rationalization for accepting limitations that I had never seriously challenged. The medical field was indeed demanding, but my residency training and board certification in reproductive endocrinology had prepared me for exactly those challenges. Private practice establishment did require significant effort, but my specialized expertise and the growing demand for fertility services should have made me an attractive candidate for existing practices or hospital affiliations.
The social dynamics of our marriage had evolved to reinforce these limitations in subtle but persistent ways. Garrett took pride in providing financially for our household, frequently mentioning that his income allowed me to pursue volunteer activities rather than working out of economic necessity. He expressed appreciation for the support I provided for his career, acknowledging that my management of social obligations and household responsibilities enabled him to focus on demanding client relationships and investment strategies. These expressions of gratitude felt genuine, but they also served to define my contributions in terms of their benefit to his career, rather than their intrinsic value or my personal fulfillment. My medical expertise was praised for its contribution to our dinner party conversations, rather than its potential application in treating patients struggling with infertility. My organizational skills were valued for their efficiency in managing household logistics, rather than their applicability to running a medical practice. My educational background was appreciated as an asset for social networking, rather than a foundation for meaningful professional contribution to reproductive medicine. Yet, underneath the surface satisfaction with our affluent lifestyle, persistent questions continued to emerge during quiet moments when distractions were unavailable. Late evening hours when Garrett traveled for business conferences provided space for reflection that I both welcomed and resisted. These periods of solitude brought awareness of the growing gap between my current activities and my original passion for helping couples achieve their dreams of parenthood. The medical journals I continued to read revealed revolutionary advances in fertility treatments, genetic screening technologies, and reproductive surgical techniques. Former colleagues from Johns Hopkins appeared as authors on groundbreaking research publications, their work building on foundations we had established together during our residency training. Professional conferences that I had once attended as a presenting physician now proceeded without my participation, though I followed their developments through published abstracts and summary reports that reminded me of the cutting-edge medicine I was missing. This one took us ages to get right, so if you're loving it, hitting subscribe would honestly mean the world to us. Okay, back to business. Social media connections with former medical school classmates and residency colleagues provided regular updates on career achievements that I observed with a mixture of pride and profound regret. Promotions to department chief positions, appointments to prestigious medical boards, and recognition through professional awards marked milestones that my former peers were achieving, while I organized charity galas and managed household staff schedules. The contrast between my current activities and my previous medical aspirations became particularly acute during conversations with Garrett about his clients who struggled with fertility issues. His wealthy clientele frequently sought referrals to the best reproductive specialists, and when he mentioned difficulties with conception delays or pregnancy losses, I often recognized treatment approaches that could address their challenges. However, my medical insights were received as general sympathy rather than professional expertise. When I suggested specific fertility evaluations or treatment protocols, Garrett would dismiss my recommendations as outdated information since I hadn't practiced medicine in years. These interactions highlighted the extent to which my medical expertise had become invisible within our marriage. Garrett valued my intelligence and education in abstract terms, but he no longer associated these qualities with current medical knowledge that could benefit his clients or our social circle. My medical degree and specialized training in reproductive endocrinology were acknowledged as past accomplishments rather than present capabilities that could contribute to solving contemporary fertility challenges. The disconnect between my educational background and my current role became increasingly difficult to ignore as national discussions about fertility treatments and reproductive rights intensified. Media coverage of new IVF technologies, insurance coverage debates, and breakthrough genetic therapies frequently included medical inaccuracies that I could identify immediately. Public discussions about fertility medicine revealed widespread misunderstanding of basic reproductive science principles that I had spent years studying and applying in clinical practice. My volunteer work at the Regional Medical Center provided some opportunities to address these knowledge gaps through patient education programs, but these activities felt limited compared to the direct patient care and advanced fertility treatments I might have been providing through active medical practice. The most challenging aspect of my situation was the growing awareness that my career limitations were largely self-imposed rather than externally mandated. No medical licensing board had revoked my credentials. No hospital system had blacklisted me from employment opportunities. No institutional policies prevented me from resuming fertility medicine practice based on my marital status or extended absence from clinical work. Instead, the limitations had emerged through a series of small decisions and gradual accommodations that had seemed reasonable at the time, but had collectively resulted in the complete abandonment of my medical calling. Each individual compromise had been justified by immediate circumstances and social expectations, but the cumulative effect had been the systematic elimination of my professional identity as a physician. This recognition created internal tension that became increasingly difficult to manage through charity work and social activities that had previously provided sufficient intellectual engagement. The gap between my medical capabilities and my current activities was becoming too large to ignore. Yet the practical challenges of resuming fertility medicine practice after 6 years of absence seemed overwhelming.
The medical field valued current clinical experience and active hospital privileges, both of which I lacked after years focused on supporting Garrett's career advancement. Medical technology had advanced significantly during my absence, requiring substantial continuing education to update my knowledge and skills. The professional networks that were essential for establishing a practice or securing hospital appointments had weakened through years of limited contact with active physicians. Perhaps most significantly, the confidence and professional identity that were necessary for managing complex fertility cases and making critical medical decisions had been eroded through years of accepting secondary roles and deferring to others' expertise. The Dr. Evelyn Ashford, who had successfully completed challenging reproductive endocrinology cases, felt like a different person from the Mrs. Garrett Thornfield, who organized fundraising events and managed social calendars. Yet the fundamental medical knowledge and analytical capabilities that had enabled my residency achievements remained intact, even if they were currently applied to different purposes. The diagnostic thinking that had guided fertility treatment decisions was equally effective for managing complex household logistics and coordinating multiple social obligations. The attention to detail that had ensured accurate hormone protocols was equally valuable for organizing elaborate dinner parties and maintaining our home's sophisticated systems. The communication skills that had enabled sensitive discussions with fertility patients were equally useful for managing difficult social situations and supporting Garrett's client relationships. The problem-solving abilities that had guided couples through complex treatment decisions were equally applicable to resolving family conflicts and coordinating our busy social calendar. These capabilities were being utilized, but they were not being challenged or appropriately engaged by work that required only a fraction of my intellectual capacity. This underutilization created a persistent sense of restlessness that no amount of volunteer activity or social engagement seemed capable of addressing. The work that occupied my time left substantial mental resources unused and unstimulated, creating an internal pressure that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The restlessness intensified during news coverage of fertility breakthroughs, where medical experts provided analysis and recommendations that influence healthcare policy and treatment standards. These experts appeared to be my former colleagues, physicians with similar educational backgrounds and residency training who had maintained their clinical engagement while I had stepped away from active practice. The realization that I could potentially contribute to these important medical discussions but had chosen not to maintain the professional engagement necessary for such contributions created a sense of regret that was becoming increasingly difficult to suppress. The volunteer work that had initially provided satisfying intellectual engagement now felt insufficient compared to the patient care and medical research I might have been pursuing. This growing dissatisfaction with my current circumstances coincided with increasing demands from Garrett's career that required even greater support from me. His recent promotion to managing partner at Hartwell Associates had brought expanded responsibilities that included more frequent business travel, longer client entertainment obligations, and increased social commitments that were essential for maintaining relationships with high-net-worth investors. The promotion represented significant financial success that we had both worked toward, but it also required adjustments to our established routines that placed additional constraints on my time and energy. The increased social obligations included formal events where I was expected to represent our family appropriately while supporting Garrett's professional networking objectives with potential clients and business partners. Yet, during quiet moments of reflection, I found myself wondering what my former patients were experiencing, whether new treatment protocols could have helped the couples I remembered from my residency, and how the field of reproductive medicine had evolved during my absence. The questions persisted, creating an undercurrent of professional longing that no amount of social success could satisfy. This internal conflict between growing dissatisfaction with current limitations and uncertainty about realistic alternatives was the context in which Garrett announced that we would be attending a high-profile client dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. The dinner was designed to celebrate the successful completion of a major investment portfolio for the Pemberton family, whose patriarch controlled significant assets in biotechnology and pharmaceutical ventures. The evening represented a crucial networking opportunity for Garrett's continued advancement at Hartwell Associates, as the Pembertons were considering additional investment strategies that could generate substantial commission revenue for the firm. The guest list included other managing partners, senior associates, and their spouses, creating a formal social environment where professional relationships were cultivated through carefully orchestrated personal interactions. I approached the dinner with the same meticulous preparation that had become routine for such events. The selection of appropriate attire required careful consideration of fashion choices that would convey sophistication without appearing ostentatious, elegance without seeming competitive with other wives present. The conversational preparation involved reviewing current events, cultural topics, and business developments that might arise during dinner discussions. However, this particular evening would prove different from the countless similar social obligations that had filled our calendar for years. As we arrived at Le Bernardin and were seated at the elegantly appointed private dining room, I noticed a familiar figure at a nearby table that caused my heart to skip several beats. Dr. Camille Rousseau, one of the most respected reproductive endocrinologists in the country, was dining with what appeared to be colleagues from the medical community. Dr. Rousseau had been a guest lecturer during my residency training at Johns Hopkins, and her groundbreaking research in fertility preservation and genetic screening had influenced treatment protocols worldwide.
The recognition created an unexpected surge of professional longing that I struggled to suppress while maintaining appropriate social composure for Garrett's business dinner. Seeing Dr. Rousseau in person reminded me viscerally of the medical career I had abandoned and the meaningful work I might have been contributing to the field of reproductive medicine. The dinner conversation proceeded according to predictable patterns, with the men discussing market trends and investment strategies, while the wives shared updates about home renovation projects and upcoming charity events. I participated in these conversations with practiced ease, though my attention kept drifting toward Dr. Rousseau's table, where animated medical discussions appeared to be taking place. The evening took an unexpected turn when conversation shifted toward personal topics, specifically family planning and the challenges that several couples in our social circle had been experiencing with conception delays. Mrs. Pemberton mentioned that her daughter had been struggling with fertility issues for 3 years, having undergone multiple unsuccessful IVF cycles at prominent fertility centers without achieving pregnancy. The discussion created an opening for me to contribute medical insights that might be helpful, based on my understanding of advanced fertility treatments and diagnostic approaches that could address complex reproductive challenges. However, as I began to offer suggestions about alternative treatment protocols and specialized testing options, Garrett interrupted with dismissive comments about my outdated medical knowledge. He suggested that anyone seriously dealing with fertility issues should consult current specialists rather than relying on information from someone who hadn't practiced medicine in years. The dismissal was delivered with the kind of patronizing tone that had become increasingly common in our private conversations, but had never before been displayed so publicly in professional settings. The conversation continued with Mrs. Pemberton expressing frustration about the lack of clear answers from multiple fertility specialists her daughter had consulted. She mentioned specific treatment failures and diagnostic confusion that I recognized as indicators of underlying conditions that required specialized evaluation approaches. When I attempted to provide more detailed medical guidance about potential causes and treatment alternatives, Garrett's response escalated to outright hostility. He announced to the entire table that I had delusions of medical expertise despite being completely removed from actual healthcare practice. The humiliation deepened when he suggested that my inability to conceive children myself after 6 years of marriage demonstrated that I lacked the practical understanding necessary to advise others about fertility treatments. The comment about my supposed infertility was delivered with calculated cruelty, designed to undermine my credibility while establishing his authority over medical discussions. However, Garrett's most devastating assault came when he declared that our marriage had been a complete waste of his prime reproductive years because of my barren condition. He suggested that my medical background had created false confidence about fertility that had prevented us from seeking appropriate treatment for what he characterized as my obvious reproductive dysfunction. The public humiliation was so profound that the entire dining room fell silent, with other guests appearing shocked by the personal nature of Garrett's attack on my medical competence and reproductive capabilities. The cruelty of his comments extended beyond professional dismissal to include deeply personal accusations about my worth as a woman and wife. What Garrett didn't realize was that Dr. Rousseau had been following our conversation from her nearby table, and her expression had shifted from polite attention to obvious concern and recognition. As the uncomfortable silence stretched across the dining room, Dr. Rousseau approached our table with the confident authority that characterized physicians accustomed to addressing difficult situations. She introduced herself to the group and specifically acknowledged my medical background, mentioning that she remembered me from my residency presentations at Johns Hopkins and had followed some of my early research publications in reproductive endocrinology. The recognition from such a distinguished physician immediately challenged Garrett's characterization of my medical credentials as outdated or irrelevant. Dr. Rousseau then addressed the fertility discussion that had precipitated Garrett's attack, providing sophisticated medical insights that validated many of the fertility treatment approaches I had been attempting to suggest. Her explanations demonstrated that my medical knowledge remained current and applicable to contemporary fertility challenges, contradicting Garrett's dismissive assertions about my expertise. However, the most shocking moment came when Dr. Rousseau casually mentioned that she had recently been consulting on a complex fertility case involving a young woman named Natasha Winters, whose treatment had required specialized protocols for addressing reproductive complications related to sexually transmitted infections that had caused significant fallopian tube damage. The name Natasha caused an immediate and dramatic reaction at our table. Garrett's face drained of color, while Mrs. Pemberton and several other guests exchanged meaningful glances that suggested they recognized the significance of this revelation. The uncomfortable silence that followed indicated that Dr. Rousseau had inadvertently identified someone known to members of our social circle. Dr. Rousseau continued her clinical discussion, explaining that Miss Winters had required extensive fertility preservation procedures due to severe reproductive tract damage from untreated chlamydia infections. The medical details she provided made it clear that this patient had been sexually active with multiple partners while concealing significant reproductive health issues. The revelation created an atmosphere of tension and embarrassment that extended far beyond the original discussion of fertility treatments. Garrett's hostile demeanor had completely disappeared, replaced by obvious distress and confusion about how his personal relationships had become the subject of medical discussion at a professional business dinner.
As Dr. Rousseau concluded her medical insights and returned to her table, the implications of her revelations continued to reverberate through our dinner party. The sophisticated medical discussion had not only validated my expertise, but had also exposed connections between Garrett's accusations and his own personal relationships that cast his attack on my reproductive capabilities in an entirely different light. The drive home from Les Bernardin proceeded in suffocating silence as Garrett processed the catastrophic implications of Dr. Rousseau's inadvertent revelations about Natasha Winters. His earlier confidence and aggression had evaporated completely, replaced by the panicked demeanor of someone whose carefully constructed deceptions were unraveling in real time. When we finally arrived at our Brookhaven Hills home, Garrett's immediate response was to launch into frantic damage control rather than address the fundamental issues that Dr. Rousseau's medical discussion had exposed. He insisted that the Natasha mentioned by Dr. Rousseau must be a different person entirely, despite the obvious recognition displayed by Mrs. Pemberton and other dinner guests who clearly understood the significance of the revelation. His denials became increasingly desperate as he realized that his public attack on my reproductive capabilities had been witnessed by the same social circle that apparently knew about his relationship with a woman whose fertility issues stemmed from sexually transmitted infections. The irony of his accusations about my supposed infertility delivered in front of people who understood the actual medical situation created a humiliation that he was struggling to process. However, rather than acknowledging his betrayal or expressing remorse for the public cruelty he had displayed, Garrett's response focused entirely on protecting his professional reputation and social standing. He demanded that I contact Dr. Rousseau immediately to clarify any misunderstandings about patient confidentiality and ensure that no additional medical information would be shared in social settings. The audacity of this request revealed the depth of his self-absorption and manipulation. After publicly humiliating me with false accusations about my reproductive capabilities and medical competence, he expected me to protect him from the consequences of his own infidelity by managing the professional relationships that had exposed his deception? His demands escalated throughout the weekend as the implications of Friday evening's revelations continued to unfold. Garrett insisted that I needed to rebuild relationships with our social circle to minimize the damage from what he characterized as an unfortunate coincidence rather than a deserved exposure of his betrayal. He suggested that my response to his dinner comments had been overly sensitive and that my failure to defend our marriage more effectively had contributed to the embarrassing situation. These accusations demonstrated his complete inability to acknowledge responsibility for the public humiliation he had inflicted or the private betrayal that Dr. Rousseau's revelations had confirmed. The weekend also brought unexpected contact from several sources that fundamentally altered my understanding of available options and realistic possibilities for moving forward. Mrs. Pemberton called on Saturday morning to express her embarrassment about the dinner situation and to request a private conversation about her daughter's fertility challenges. During our lengthy phone discussion, Mrs. Pemberton revealed that she had been aware of Garrett's relationship with Natasha Winters for several months, having observed them together at various social venues around the city. She explained that the wealthy social circle in Millbrook was relatively small and that extramarital relationships rarely remain secret for extended periods of time. Mrs. Pemberton's call served multiple purposes beyond addressing her daughter's medical needs. She wanted to apologize for not warning me about Garrett's infidelity and to express her admiration for the grace I had displayed during his public attack. More importantly, she offered concrete support for rebuilding my medical career, including financial backing for establishing a private fertility practice and introductions to influential healthcare administrators who could facilitate hospital privilege applications. The conversation with Mrs. Pemberton revealed that my medical expertise had been recognized and valued by members of our social circle, even while Garrett had been systematically undermining my professional confidence and career aspirations. Her offer of support represented validation and opportunity that I had not anticipated, creating realistic possibilities for resuming meaningful medical practice. Dr. Rousseau also contacted me over the weekend, ostensibly to apologize for any discomfort her medical discussion had caused during the dinner. However, her call evolved into a comprehensive conversation about current opportunities in reproductive medicine and her assessment of my potential for successful career re-entry despite the extended absence from clinical practice. Dr. Rousseau explained that the field of fertility medicine was experiencing unprecedented demand that exceeded the available supply of qualified specialists. Advanced reproductive technologies, genetic screening capabilities, and expanded insurance coverage had created patient volumes that required additional experienced physicians with specialized training. She indicated that my educational background and residency training remained highly relevant to contemporary practice, despite technological advances that had occurred during my absence. The fundamental principles of reproductive endocrinology had not changed substantially, though specific protocols and treatment options had expanded significantly. Dr. Rousseau offered specific guidance about continuing education requirements, licensing renewal procedures, and hospital credentialing processes that would enable effective transition back to active medical practice. Most significantly, Dr. Rousseau revealed that she had been following my early research publications and believed that my analytical approach to complex fertility cases could contribute meaningfully to current challenges in reproductive medicine. Her professional validation directly contradicted years of Garrett's undermining comments about my outdated medical knowledge and irrelevant expertise.
The conversations with Mrs. Pemberton and Dr. Rousseau created concrete possibilities for professional re-engagement that extended far beyond theoretical consideration. Financial support, professional mentoring, and institutional connections removed many of the practical barriers that had seemed insurmountable when contemplating career re-entry as an abstract possibility. However, pursuing these opportunities would require decisive action that challenged the fundamental dynamics of my marriage and the social expectations that had shaped my decisions for 6 years. Garrett's response to these developments revealed the depth of his investment in maintaining control over my professional choices and personal identity. When I mentioned the career opportunities that Mrs. Pemberton and Dr. Rousseau had discussed, Garrett's reaction was immediate and hostile. He expressed outrage that I was considering taking advantage of his personal embarrassment to pursue selfish professional goals that would interfere with supporting his career recovery from the dinner incident.
His response revealed that he viewed my potential medical practice as competition rather than personal fulfillment, and that he expected me to prioritize repairing his damaged reputation over addressing my own professional aspirations. The conversation made clear that Garrett saw my role as subordinate to his needs, regardless of his betrayal or the opportunities that his behavior had inadvertently created. The resistance intensified when I began taking concrete steps toward licensure renewal and continuing education requirements. Garrett objected to the time commitment required for medical coursework, questioning whether the effort was worthwhile given what he characterized as slim prospects for successful career reestablishment after such an extended absence. His objections extended to financial concerns about the costs associated with licensure, credentialing, and practice establishment. Despite our substantial household income and the financial support that Mrs. Pemberton had offered. Each practical concern he raised seemed designed to discourage action rather than solve problems that could be addressed through systematic planning and effort. The week following the Le Bernardin dinner became a critical decision point where I needed to choose between maintaining our established arrangements or pursuing the meaningful professional engagement that had become suddenly and unexpectedly available. The choice represented more than career planning. It encompassed fundamental questions about identity, self-worth, and the kind of life I wanted to create for the remaining decades of my working years. The decision crystallized on Wednesday morning when I received a call from the Westbridge Fertility Institute offering me a position as senior reproductive endocrinologist, with a compensation package that exceeded Garrett's salary by 40% and included full support for continuing education, research opportunities, and partnership track advancement within 2 years. Dr. Rousseau had personally recommended me for the position, and the Institute's medical director had reviewed my residency records and early research publications with enthusiasm that validated years of dormant professional capabilities. The offer represented not just employment, but recognition of my potential to contribute meaningfully to cutting-edge fertility medicine and patient care. However, accepting the position would require immediate action on licensure renewal, hospital credentialing, and continuing education requirements that would demonstrate my commitment to returning to active medical practice. The Institute needed a decision within 48 hours due to patient care demands that could not be delayed indefinitely. When I informed Garrett about the job offer, his response revealed the complete absence of support or celebration that would have characterized a healthy marriage. Instead of expressing pride in my professional achievement or excitement about our enhanced financial prospects, he launched into systematic objections designed to prevent me from accepting the opportunity. Garrett questioned whether I possessed the current medical knowledge necessary for handling complex fertility cases after years away from clinical practice. He suggested that accepting such a senior position would set me up for failure and potential malpractice liability that could affect our family's financial security and social reputation. His arguments focused on identifying risks and obstacles rather than exploring solutions or expressing confidence in my capabilities. The approach felt familiar from years of conversations where he had consistently emphasized challenges while discouraging ambitious professional goals. However, the extensive preparation I had undertaken during recent weeks had provided me with comprehensive information about licensure requirements, continuing education options, and support systems available for physicians returning to practice after career interruptions. The practical concerns that Garrett raised were manageable rather than insurmountable, representing challenges that could be addressed through systematic effort rather than barriers that prevented professional re-engagement. More significantly, the external validation I had received from Dr. Rousseau, Mrs. Pemberton, and the Westbridge Fertility Institute provided objective assessment of my qualifications and potential that contradicted Garrett's consistently negative evaluation of my professional prospects. The support and encouragement from respected medical professionals carried more credibility than resistance from someone whose judgment had been compromised by personal betrayal and self-interest. The 48-hour deadline created pressure that eliminated the possibility of extended deliberation or gradual decision-making.
I needed to choose immediately between maintaining the limitations that had constrained my aspirations for 6 years or pursuing the meaningful professional engagement that aligned with my capabilities and passion for reproductive medicine. Thursday evening, as the deadline approached, I completed the acceptance paperwork and submitted my commitment to join the Westbridge Fertility Institute as Senior Reproductive Endocrinologist. The decision represented rejection of the secondary role that had defined my identity as Mrs. Garrett Thornfield, and embracement of the professional challenges that would restore my identity as Dr. Evelyn Ashford.
Garrett's reaction to my decision was explosive and revealing. He accused me of selfishness and disloyalty for pursuing career opportunities that would interfere with supporting his recovery from the professional embarrassment caused by the Bernardin incident. His response made clear that he expected me to prioritize repairing his damaged reputation over pursuing my own professional fulfillment. The conversation escalated when he threatened to contest any divorce proceedings and demand spousal support based on his financial contributions to our household during my years of unemployment. His threats revealed that he viewed our marriage primarily as an economic arrangement, where my role was to provide support services in exchange for financial security. However, the transformation in my circumstances had altered the economic dynamics substantially. The Westbridge position offered compensation that exceeded our current household income, while Mrs. Pemberton's financial backing provided resources for establishing independent living arrangements without economic hardship. The threats that might have been intimidating when I lacked independent financial prospects now seemed desperate rather than controlling. Garrett's attempts to maintain dominance through economic pressure were ineffective when I possessed superior earning potential and external financial support. The most satisfying aspect of this transformation was discovering information that provided complete clarity about the fertility issues that had affected our marriage. During my first week at Westbridge, Dr. Rousseau shared additional details about Natasha Winter's medical history that explained the reproductive challenges Garrett had attributed to my supposed infertility. Medical records revealed that Natasha had transmitted chlamydia infections to multiple sexual partners, including Garrett, who had then infected me without disclosure or treatment. The untreated sexually transmitted infection had caused subtle reproductive tract inflammation that affected conception rates, creating fertility challenges that Garrett had blamed entirely on my reproductive capabilities. The medical evidence provided definitive proof that our conception difficulties stemmed from Garrett's infidelity and deception rather than any inherent fertility problems on my part. The irony of his public accusations about my barren condition was that he had caused the very fertility issues he used to justify his betrayal and humiliation. Armed with this medical documentation, I filed for divorce with evidence of adultery, transmission of sexually transmitted infections, and emotional abuse that ensured favorable settlement terms and eliminated any possibility of spousal support claims. The legal proceedings concluded within 6 months with full financial independence and restoration of my professional identity. The transition to active medical practice at Westbridge proved even more fulfilling than I had anticipated. The continuing education programs effectively updated my knowledge of current fertility treatments, while my analytical capabilities and patient care skills remained strong despite the extended absence from clinical work. Within the first year, I had developed innovative treatment protocols for complex fertility cases and published research that contributed to advancement in reproductive medicine. The professional recognition I achieved validated the decision to pursue meaningful work despite the personal and social costs involved. Patient outcomes at Westbridge improved measurably due to my contributions, while my research collaborations with leading fertility centers enhanced the institute's reputation and attracted additional qualified physicians to our team.
The meaningful work of helping couples achieve their dreams of parenthood provided exactly the professional fulfillment that had been missing from volunteer activities and social obligations. 2 years later, I was promoted to medical director of the Westbridge Fertility Institute, with responsibilities for overseeing clinical operations, research initiatives, and physician recruitment that utilized all of my capabilities while providing opportunities for continued growth and advancement. The transformation from Mrs. Garrett Thornfield to Dr. Evelyn Ashford had been complete and irreversible. The public humiliation that had seemed catastrophic at Bernardin had actually provided the catalyst for reclaiming my professional identity and achieving levels of success that exceeded my original career aspirations. Mrs. Pemberton's daughter successfully conceived twins using treatment protocols I developed specifically for her complex fertility challenges, creating lasting gratitude and friendship that enriched both our personal and professional lives. Dr. Rousseau became a valued mentor and collaborator, whose guidance continued to enhance my clinical effectiveness and research contributions. The story serves as a reminder that sometimes the cruelest attacks from those closest to us reveal truths about our own potential that we had forgotten or allowed others to diminish. Garrett's attempts to humiliate me had inadvertently connected me with the professional validation and opportunities that restored my confidence and career trajectory. The people who work hardest to keep us small often do so because they recognize capabilities that threaten their control over our choices and identity. Breaking free from those limitations requires courage to pursue opportunities despite resistance, but the rewards of authentic professional engagement far exceed the temporary security of accepting diminished roles.